Hi, I'm James and welcome to the Online Radio Training School. These days on both radio and the internet, we have access to a huge range of Bible teaching in the audio format. This can include radio programs that you tune into, podcasts that you download or stream, and website links that you click on and listen to. Much of this Bible teaching is taken from sermons that have been recorded in a church. Many churches record their sermons and post them on their website. Now, this is largely for people who miss church or who want to hear the sermon again. The amount of work required for this is generally minimal. However, a sermon that is adapted into a radio program or a podcast requires a lot more work. It will need to be cut to duration, the sound quality will need to be excellent, and it will need to be professionally presented. And we'll learn more about these things as we progress through this series. And that's what this series is all about. How to turn a recorded sermon into a listenable and enjoyable podcast or radio program. We'll look at making the recording, processing, editing the audio, presenting the finished product, as well as making station promos to advertise it. But before we start investing resources into a project like this, there are some essential things we need to think about. Firstly, we need to ask, do we have something special to offer that will keep people coming back? In other words, the actual content of our sermons is interesting and life-changing. The preacher's delivery is compelling. It's presented in a way that makes people want to listen. You may say yes to all of these questions because it's your church. But if your target audience is the wider community, you need to get their opinion too. Perhaps you need to make a sample program and get feedback from other people. Ask them if they enjoyed the content. Even though they weren't at the venue, did they still feel included? Did the content compel them to take action? Ask them about the delivery. Was the preacher believable? Did they like his voice? Did it translate well into the audio format? Ask the questions, but be prepared for the answers. Secondly, it's important that we understand how people listen. Apart from the people in your congregation who missed the service, our experience shows that almost no one will deliberately sit down to listen to a recorded sermon in its entirety. Podcasting is, in effect, radio programs on demand. A recent survey by the Content Marketing Institute shows that the average time spent listening to podcasts was 16 minutes. And these days, most people will listen while they're on the move, on a portable device. The most likely times are the daily commute or during exercise. Now, you don't want people tuning out before they get to the main point of the sermon, so if you add music and a program host, each episode should not go over 20 minutes. This fits within the average commute time and the average exercise duration. So this means that a sermon needs to be divided into multiple program episodes, and each episode needs to be the same duration. And if people become regular listeners, it's because of one thing: relationship. They relate to the delivery, they relate to the message, and they relate to the preacher as a person. You may have several excellent preachers in your congregation. However, please feature just one preacher in your program, because this helps to build consistency and relationship. Thirdly, people listening into the recording are not sitting in your church. They can't see what's happening. They can't relate to you talking about in-house things. You have two audiences, so the presentation will need to change to reflect this. Make sure your church audience understands. If the preacher uses visual props, these need to be described for the listener. PowerPoint presentations are fine, but the preacher must not draw attention to them. Phrases like, "As you can see in this next slide," alienate your listener. Of course, if video clips or MP3s are used to illustrate a sermon, they will need to be edited out of your recording. Fourthly, do you have the resources to make this all happen? By resources, I mean, do you have the funds to buy the equipment you need? Have you budgeted for consumables like lapel microphones? Yes, these wear out. Headphones, batteries, cables, and computer repairs. Do you have the right skilled people? Can they commit to keeping to broadcast deadlines week in and week out? And do you have the time to produce a great product? And finally, what do you do if broadcasting a sermon didn't work out, but the content is still great? Here are a couple of options. Distill the main points of the sermon into short 60-second bites and produce a daily devotional spot. This is recorded in a studio or a quiet room and will require some production. And you get to choose who voices it. These spots work really well during busy hours on radio stations. Or rewrite the sermon for a radio audience. Break each sermon into 5 7-minute episodes so they play Monday to Friday. Again, record it in a studio and produce it nicely. Of course, talk to radio stations and find out what they need. Well, if you're still on board with us, join us for the next 2 videos in the series. We'll look at how to get a great recording that you can use to make a radio program or podcast from your church sermon. Until then, happy broadcasting.